one. Thank you so much. It's number two. Let's be clear about that. Okay. Have a seat. Hi, I'm Robert McBride. I am entertaining a demon in my lungs. So I'm going to try to get through this without coughing very much. I apologize in advance for the little bit of coughing that I may do during this 30-minute conversation with Alexander Liebreich.
Very good evening.
Who is making his Oregon Symphony debut and his United States debut with these concerts. Do you want to sit or do you want to stand? I can go either way. And he's from Munich, and I just met him a few minutes ago, and he said something really wonderful that I love to hear from anybody I'm interviewing in any context. He didn't want to know in advance anything I would ask him. There are people who want to know everything in advance. He's not like that. Good for you. Are you an in-the-moment kind of man in general?
I hope so. When you once have the chance to prepare, then you are preparing, but then you're not focused because you think, is he going to ask this? No, it's better just being there and just see what the moment brings. Also, with the orchestra, you might think you can control, but in the moment of the concert, no control. It's just there. Yeah.
I used to work for somebody who was really into preparation, everything, and I used to prod him a little by saying preparation is overrated, just to get to him. Is there anything on the concert tonight, excuse me, that you've never conducted before?
No, actually all the three pieces are very familiar to me. So I think the most familiar was actually the Charles Ives piece, which I came across very early through my wife, who is a ballet dancer. And this music was part of a choreography. So I heard it and she said, well, you have to hear this wonderful music. And since then I carried this music. And then I got the attention through one book I got recommended, which you probably know. It's The Unanswered Question, the Harvard lectures by Lenny Bernstein, which are amazing. And you have these 6 lectures in the books, and I think they're also on video somehow, but it's all about, let's say, breaking time at 1906, which is such an important, crazy year.
Yeah, this piece, The Unanswered Question, is really one of the opening the doors to modern music. And he didn't get to hear it until 1946. It wasn't performed. That was typical with Ives. He was an insurance salesman who made his fortune that way and wrote his music on the side, and it was mostly ignored for a very long time. But it's a wonderful little piece. And I don't think I've ever seen The Unanswered Question paired with Also Sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss, but it's absolute perfection, especially the way the Strauss ends, which is definitely an unanswered question. It is so weird, but you'll know the way it begins. I, like a lot of people my generation who didn't grow up in a classical music family, wasn't a lot of classical music in the house, I didn't hear the opening measures of Also Sprach Zarathustra until I was in a movie theater, which this used to be, watching 2001 when it first came out. But I'm guessing you knew the music completely aside from that, right?
Well, the Zarathustra was basically composed just 10 years before the Ives, so 1896, in Munich, not far from the place where I'm living. So Strauss was born in München, and he spent the second half of his life in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, where the Strauss Festival is, and where I'm happy to be the director there, so I'm really kind of into the whole Strauss thing there. No, I think to the most Bavarian people, it's still because of Stanley Kubrick's film from, I think, 1969, the Space Odyssey. I think that made it really extremely famous, and a lot of other movies. And then later people say, oh, this is also Sprach Zarathustra. But after these 2 minutes, nobody would know the piece anymore, and it still takes half an hour to end. So, but it's fantastic music, especially after that. It really goes into, I think, a very, very delicate singing, and then it builds up to dance. There is kind of Bavarian folk into like waltz, not only Viennese waltz, but really Bavarian, like very rustic waltz with 2 harps inside, which just do that. And in the end, there is the church bell, which really tries to invade the piece, because this piece is kind of slightly doubtful about the religion, like Strauss was. He actually collected a lot of religious stuff, but during the war times, just to have something which he can collect kind of items to keep the money, because he had very bad experience with some houses he had. So he just collected little Marias. When you are in the house in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, you say, well, is he a religious person? No, he was not so much religious. So we had a huge 12 times bang the clock, where we just tried to invade the Zarathustra in the end.
And another thing to listen for in this piece is a fugue on a theme which uses all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. It's really an incredible thing. Not only was Richard Strauss not religious, he also wasn't particularly philosophical. But this piece is freely after Nietzsche. And he was interesting. He was into it for the music. It was all about the music, and yet at the same time, he always seemed to need some kind of theme, some kind of story to get him going. I don't know if he's unique in that way, but maybe among the major composers, he was the most in that direction, would you say?
Well, he was, I think there have been not so many music geniuses. I think Mozart certainly was one, Mendelssohn was one, just from the, and Strauss was one. And that made, in his case, life very tricky, because he was kind of snobbish, slightly arrogant. And he was kind of thinking above the society. He always would say, I can compose everything. And there is this, I think, the famous story from Garmisch-Partenkirchen, from his house, and the people still tell this story. After, when the Americans came to Garmisch-Partenkirchen to free Bavaria from the Nazi regime, Strauss was immediately saying, welcome, opening his door. He had a very tricky past, and I'm quite skeptical. So I am half back from a Jewish background, half back from Catholic background. So I'm always just questioning a little bit his time between 1933 and 1945. But he would say, "Okay, come on in." And so there was one oboe player. I'm sure you know this story. I don't. Which orchestra was it? Was it
Philadelphia?
Philadelphia. I think it was the second oboe player. Who was in the military in American, and he was come on in, and he said, "Well, I'm a musician too. You know, I'm playing the oboe. Have you ever composed the Oboe Concerto?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Why don't you compose a Oboe Concerto?" And he said, "Well, why? I can compose everything." He was very snobbish, and then he put a glass of beer in front of him, put it down there. And then the beer made inside just a little, and she says, "Okay, da 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 da, ya da da da," and this was just the start, where this Oboe Concerto. And then just after the war, 1946, he composed this Oboe Concerto, and he was kind of in the morning doing some work, afternoon was having beer. He was married to Paulini, who was a major brewery boss at that time. Playing some cards, Skat, not Schafkopf, which is Bavarian. Skat is actually very northern German. And then in the end having kind of his time in society.
Well, I didn't realize that his wife was connected to brewing money.
Yeah, Hacker Pschorr, very famous Bavarian beer brewery. Yeah.
So life could have been worse for
yeah.
Though she was famous also for interrupting him. If he was clowning around with his friends for too long, she'd come in and say, "You know, you really should be composing, so get to it."
So we're trying, always getting this brewery, which is still huge, to get as a sponsor for the Strauss Festival. No.
So the Unanswered Question, which may have been inspired by Emerson. Ives wrote a paper on Emerson when he was in college, and then he wrote this piece, and the Unanswered Question is a line from Emerson. These unperturbable strings that just do their thing. They don't care what else goes on. A solo trumpet that asks the question 7 times, exactly the same. And then there's this gaggle of woodwinds who attempt to answer. They get more agitated and frustrated and desperate every time, and then they finally give up. And the trumpet, one last time. And will the trumpet be off stage for this? Yeah, it's often done that way. So, and then we're talking about the second half of the concert here. Then also Sprach Zarathustra. So Zarathustra, Nietzsche, the Superman, life, death, nihilism, religion, philosophy. Do you dig into that much yourself, or are you more like Herr Strauss? You'd rather just deal with the music?
If I may speak just about the musical grammar of this piece and then the, let's say, the transition. We are really not doing a change between these pieces. We just played attacca totalmente.
Excellent.
Because the orchestra plays in C major. This string chord stays in a kind of floating C major in triple piano. Nothing happens, and as you said. And then there's the question, atonal, 1906, a year where Schoenberg had his chamber music, Kammer Symphony, where Strauss already has composed Salome, his peak of avant-garde. Mahler was in the end of his symphonies. So this trumpet signal always ends with the atonal question ending with B flat, but never reaching the C. And then the woodwind's always kind of getting more crazy because this disturbance between the strings who kind of don't react and this stronger getting question, it's not solved. But then, this whole Zarathustra starts with the C major of the trumpets.
That's brilliant.
So, what you will see, because we just go over attacca, you will see him very softly sneaking into the Zarathustra because he ends the Ives and he starts the Zarathustra.
Oh, that's true. He's only got a few measures.
Basically answering his own question in C major. So, but what ends in the Zarathustra, which is when the Zarathustra goes from the C major, which kind of signifies sunrise, nature, mountains, nature really strongly, ends in B major, but then still Strauss, being already avant-garde in this time, not later, but in this time still avant-garde thinking, he ends in B major, but still the last note is again the C from the double bass. So this friction about unanswered question stays in the Zarathustra extremely softly, just like in the Ives. It's amazing because the C major has kind of this significance about absolute Naturklang, nature sound.
That's going to be a wonderful moment at the end of the Ives. Segue to that low C. Because my ignorance knows no bounds, I didn't know until today that also Sprach Zarathustra is one of two, maybe three orchestral pieces where the double basses have to go all the way down to a low B below that low C.
Exactly.
I didn't realize that. So,
and you see them always.
Yeah. So there are some European
me.
orchestras, especially in Germany, that use 5 strings. In this country, it's much, much, much more common to have an extension so that they can go all the way down, which I've always called a low C extension, but I guess some people tune it to B.
They have to, yeah. They have to tune and retune it because they have to play both. So they have to get it back in tune, and so you will see like
right.
Yeah, which is fun. That was, yeah.
Interesting. So, we really should talk about the first piece on tonight's program, which is Scheherazade Point 2 by John Adams, kind of inspired by Scheherazade, but not the piece by Rimsky-Korsakov, even though it's also a big piece for violin and orchestra, but more by the character of Scheherazade as she's portrayed in 1001 Nights and all of that, another long story from the same part of the world. We're talking about Iran and Persia here with Zoroastrianism and also with Scheherazade. I mean, John Adams saw an exhibit of Arabian art and was struck by how brutal the story of Scheherazade is and wrote a rejoinder, a rebuttal. And I really like that idea because the story is really awful. Yeah, she's clever enough to survive this guy who would otherwise kill her so that she can't become unfaithful. Men are such jerks. It's one thing that every woman needs to learn. She's applauding at some point. They're all jerks at least some of the time. Right? You don't have to agree. You don't have to. But I would like to ask your wife if I ever get a chance. So, you've done this piece with Lila Josefowicz. How many times?
Well, we played, I think, 3 times. We did one of the European premieres in Zurich, in Switzerland, with the Tonhalle Orchestra 3 years ago.
The first time I heard this piece, I've never heard it in concert, I'm really looking forward to it. I was kind of overwhelmed by it, because big piece, 40-some minutes, lot going on. And the second time, it was much more clear. So pretend you're hearing it for the second time tonight, and it'll... But can you guide us through it?
Well, it's also for a conductor, it's hard, and I'm very happy I'm conducting it now for the 4th or for the 5th time, because the whole texture is so dense and complex. Well, I wouldn't say it's chaotic, and it's especially not the early John Adams style. It's not a minimalistic thing, so it's really, I think, much more impressionistic. So he uses one instrument to, first of all, get the Oriental atmosphere, which is the cimbalom, which you already see here in the middle. And the cimbalom actually comes from the Persian tradition, and then made his way into Greece and made his way into Europe. Then in Hungary it became very strong, and Dutilleux did a lot of pieces there, but especially like Zoltán Kodály, the dances, and that, so it really came. And now sometimes it's very well used in the modern jazz, but it not only gives a kind of like an atmosphere, but it's also because it's really a percussive instrument. And so between having these floating effects, it has a very rude effect. And we put it in front because it's always tricky from the balance to hear a cimbalom. But where I stand, and when he plays, I only hear the cimbalom, nothing else, because in my place it's like a hammering thing. So, and then we had yesterday in the dress rehearsal, someone said, well, can it be louder? And I said, no, please don't. Because when he plays, it's like tuck, 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 in front of me, and I don't have any control, basically, more what the orchestra, and also on this place, also with the, let's say, the wooden underground, it really gets kind of really a whole percussive thing. No, but the solo violin is Scheherazade. She really just incorporates, especially Elia Josefowicz, being very, let's say, poetic. That's very important, the poetic idea, but also strong fighting. The orchestra and her, the orchestra basically is all the atmosphere, but also this rude man who really don't take care, which don't respect her. They are really never together. For these almost 45, 50 minutes this piece takes, there is not one note they would kind of play really together or doing some duet. Just in the very last movement there are 2 bars, where the strings of the orchestra and she are playing together. The rest is kind of an eternal fight for her freedom. She had to go through these sections of fight, and there's always this rudeness, this stubborn idea. He writes pedantesco. Pedantic?
Pedantic.
Yeah, pedantic system. Always these people about the true believers of it's like that, it has to be like that. And this is kind of, it has an annoying effect, but then always is kind of, she stays that strong. She never gives in. And I think Leila is the perfect Scheherazade, because she is really so physical, so strong, that she stays saying no. And in the end, she's basically always kind of with her, not by winning the fight, but by staying there, and then in the end being poetic. And you're right. I think now, I mean, especially in Germany, we have a lady chancellor, and now in Finland, sometimes this poetry of women is very important, even in politics. I think that helps.
Can we hear it for strong women? Yeah. Always. Which brings us back to the subject of your wife. What kind of dancer is her? Classical ballet, modern dance, everything?
No, she was soloist of the Bavarian State Opera House. So I met her in the canteen, so I just saw her on stage. I was at that time singing, actually. I started as a singer, and I was singing and looking from the pit up there, and I just really, so well, that's her. And then I just go to the canteen and just waited for her. And now, well, very boring. We're married now for a long time already. And now, of course, she retired, and she was with an NDT. So she actually had a lot of US places on the West Coast. She did a whole tour from Seattle down to Portland and San Francisco and LA with the Netherlands Dance Theater. She was in Den Haag, a wonderful company. And she does so well.
Where is she right now?
She's Munich, home.
Well, next time you come, will you bring her?
Okay.
She can come back to the West Coast of the
she would
United
love.
States. Okay. So Leela Josefowitz, as you said, perfect for Scheherazade. She is so strong as a human being, as an artist, as a violinist. Have you ever had a tussle with a soloist in a concerto situation where they wanted one interpretation and you wanted something else?
Yes. That happens. I mean, when you're younger, you're kind of, you have to give in sometimes to, when you have your, let's say, your first opportunities to do something, but as you get kind of more experienced, you have, I think that's a nice thing to have the liberty to ask, saying, well, I would love to work with this soloist. And so that's really good. I mean, sometimes, for example, I tour a lot in Japan, and then still there is the idea of having the Japanese soloist, and then for some reason they love to do, for example, on the piano was the Chopin piano concertos, and then they just would do what they want to do and just not listen. It's not a pleasure, because when you're on stage, it's something you're together on stage, and you want to be on stage with somebody. And it's not about being right or not right, it's about doing something together. And I would not go there, I like it or I don't like it. I'm even with Leila, when she said, I would love to do that, Alexander, and she would say, well, are you okay with it? And everything is fine. But just not communicating and not doing anything, that's, fortunately, a lot of artists are really fantastic, and even the big times of the singer divas, which just go on and they would treat everybody, it's over in a way. It's not there anymore. I think it's a lot of collaboration on stage, and very, let's say, a lot of actually very open-minded and challenging people, which are fine to work with.
I love to hear you state that so positively. Has it been like that working with this orchestra?
Well, it was funny. A lot of people say, well, you have to be careful, American orchestra. And I said, well, so what? And then also, she said, but in America. And so, what? And so, I mean, in the end, it's... in Europe, you have so many American musicians all over. I mean, the concertmasters just being there. So in the end, it's about music. It was a pleasure these 3 days doing these rehearsals. They are very fast. That's something. I'm director in Prague, and they are relaxed. There, I would not say worse or better, but it's just kind of relaxed. And here, the time of the rehearsals is tight, so it's very clear. So you have to bring your concept. You have to say, no, we try it out. No, you should come with a clear idea what you want to do. That's important. But I think when you go to good orchestra, that's how it should be in general.
When you come to your first rehearsal with an orchestra you've never worked with, and you walk up here, what's the first thing you do? Do you speak to them? Do you just say which piece you're going to do and give a downbeat?
Yes, I remember the first times when I was something like 28, 30 years old, you would start kind of making an introduction. After years, I just said, no, the orchestra wants to see and to feel what your musicianship. I say, I'm happy to be here, let's start. That's the only thing. And the rest is basically the music. And then after the second rehearsal, then I told a little story about Richard Strauss, because of course they want to know why you're here, what is your relation to the music. But just before the first note, just saying, I'm happy to be here, let's start. That's basically always these two, 3 words I say, because we want to do music, that's why we're here. And that's but already in bar, and okay, he's going to explain something. No, I'm happy to be here, let's do it.
Do you sing a lot in rehearsal, since you used to be a singer?
Less. I remember when I had an orchestra in München, I have been so annoyed, and then because I was singing louder sometimes than the things, and then these old recordings from from the Bavarian radio, just okay, and then I mean, it became a myth with Celibidache. You know, he was like singing in the Bruckner symphonies just before the big climax. He was like, aah! So, but I was kind of trying to get, but since 10 years, no, not anymore, no. No, I don't know. It was one orchestra board member. I remember her. She had one solo cellist. Actually, she was Canadian. She said, "Well, Alexander, if you don't stop singing, I will leave the orchestra." So, and because she was always close to me, and okay, I learned.
I think we're in for a spectacular concert tonight with a lot of thought-provoking music, philosophical music. I would encourage you to read the program notes, like now, before the concert starts, and that will help it all make sense, I think, I hope. Alexander Liebreich, thank you and welcome to the United States of America.
Thank you so much. Looking forward. Thank you.